Yeah. He's a Hello and welcome to Springboard, your virtual university. My name is Albert Ocran, matriculating you on behalf of the virtual academic board chaired by Comfort. This is your most inspirational show and the point of convergence for the greatest minds. Springboard is brought to you by the Springboard Roadshow Foundation in partnership with the Multimedia Group and proudly sponsored by MTN, UMB Bank, the enterprise group with support from the graphic business. Today, we bring you the third part in our discussions on the changing world of work. We've been looking so far at how technological innovation, customer preferences, and COVID-19 have combined to change everything about the way we work. So far, we've delved into reports by the Deloitte Global Human Capital Trends 2017 and 2021 reports, the World Economic Forum 2020 Future of Jobs report, and the PwC Workforce for the Future report. And of course, an obvious question jumps up. Is there no Ghanaian-based report? And the answer is simple. There is. And wherever it is, the place to find it is here on your virtual university. Today, we have in our possession the Jobberman Ghana Impact of COVID-19 Jobs Report, and it has some very interesting findings about the changing world of work from the Ghanaian context. We'll be joined today to break it down by Chris Diaba, a certified executive coach and leadership facilitator, who will bring us some interesting perspectives. And all the way from the US, we'll be joined by Doris Osae-Addo, who's a compliance executive. She will show us the compliance angles to this changing world of work. And of course, in the studio, we have with us the CEO of Jobberman Ghana, the organization that put out the report. Kwaku Agbesi is here with us. Kwaku, good to see you.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, we've been going through quite a number of reports trying to get a sense of where the world is heading. What was the inspiration behind or the motivation for undertaking this study?
Okay. So thank you once again for inviting me to your esteemed show. So as we are all aware, obviously COVID-19 has really hit the employment situation here in Ghana, and obviously being an HR consultancy firm, and obviously we do a lot of recruitment as well. We thought it's prudent to give a bit of guidance to companies on how to navigate this challenging situation that they are faced with. So before I delve into that, let me talk a bit about Jobberman as a company, what we do, and then we'll talk about the report. So Jobberman was set up here in Ghana sometime in 2012. Okay, and the whole idea of Jobberman is to try and employ or bring people, job seekers and employers together. And the way we do that is, through technology. So we have what we call the automated tracking system, which is mainly a system used by employers to go there and, look at candidates, shortlist them, and then, be able to interview them. Now, back to the issue of the reports, why we did this. So obviously, we noticed that a lot of companies were going through challenges, during the COVID period. A lot of them did not know how to navigate their way through. So what we tried to do is to put together some sort of a guideline document. So first of all, talking about, why, the trending industries, which companies were still hiring at this time during the COVID-19 era. We talked also about, the sort of job functions and roles which were the most popular. We also talked about the skills, the demand for skill sets, which skill sets were...
Let me go straight to the findings that caught my attention the most.
Please go ahead.
Because of the peculiar nature of the issues that are popping up.
Sure.
We went looking for what are the big findings of the report. First one is that from the report, organizations indicated that they had made a shift.
That's correct.
In the way that they work.
That's right.
Adapted to the new demands on them. It's lined up with a previous study we examined in one of our earlier reports that said 88% of companies were just themselves willing to make some changes to the way they work. And that cut across churches, businesses, not-for-profits.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that struck me. How did you pick out on that?
Yeah, so as I said, we, as a hiring agency, obviously, we got, first of all, we obviously consulted for quite a number of companies who were going through this change. And one of the things that we said to them was, look, you have to digitize the way you work as a company. The brick and mortar is not going to be the way to go these days. So you have to implement a lot of technology in the way you work. So based on conversations we've had with a lot of these big companies in Ghana, that is something that we picked up. So it was based on both our own internal research and external research done by other companies. So, I mean, ultimately, this for me is here to stay.
Was the driver for the companies that are making these shifts, was the driver customer need, convenience, or pressure arising from lockdown, inability to physically move, restrictions, etc.? Was it the push factor or the pull factor?
I'll say it's all three, actually. It's all three, because obviously people were less likely to go out, go into a bank, for example. People were less likely to go and queue at a bank, because we all know that with COVID-19, the more you interact with people, the more you get in touch with people, the higher the likelihood of you contracting the virus. So it was a case of people not willing to go out there. Obviously, banks also has adapt to serve the needs of the people in the times that they were, what the situation was as well. And finally, companies needed to make sure that they were still providing the needs of their customers, irrespective of the pandemic situation that we faced.
Sales jumped up as one of the functions that is in such high demand. What would you say to that?
Interesting. I found that interesting as well. But I think it was more to do with the fact that companies realized that they needed salespeople to drive revenue within the company. Okay, so I think that for me was probably the reason why there was more, and obviously with technology as well, you can do a lot of what we call the telesales. So you can sell, your product either over the phone or over the internet, or you can do it virtually without necessarily meeting face to face with people. So what I noticed was, yes, sales went up, but it was more of what we call the telesales or the virtual sales. Those were the roles which were in high demand during this period.
In the banking industry, for instance, it seems to be the case that, especially in recent times, sales has ceased to be a department or a departmental function and has become an all-round function of the whole firm. And so everyone is being oriented to, as it were, have targets, have a sales orientation, and at the slightest opportunity, sell the service of the organization to.
Exactly.
Will that be the kind of thing that you say a report pushed up, the fact that sales is being pushed across the functions of the organization?
Yeah, no, good point, Albert. And, I can use my organization as an example. Although we have a core sales team, what I do when I'm speaking to other people within the organization is, look, we are all salespeople. The way you interact with our customer shows, the value that we are giving to that customer. So at any point in time, we have a customer service team, we have a finance team, we have a marketing team. These are all people who, although they provide, what I call ancillary service, because they are not core sales, at any point in time, once you speak, or you have the opportunity to speak with a customer, that is an opportunity for you to make a sales pitch. So ultimately, I think that is another reason why we are seeing this trend, because ultimately we will all be salespeople at some point in time.
The other thing that surprised me in the report was the fact that firms in accommodation and food were the least adapters to digital solutions, whereas, interestingly, firms in agriculture rather did much more adoption. Agriculture scored 56% of adoption to digital solutions.
That's correct.
And firms in food and beverage, accommodation, hospitality adopted 28% to these digital opportunities. What would explain that?
Good question. I mean, I was a bit with hospitality. I mean, we all expected that to be the case, because obviously with less travel and people going on holidays less, there was going to be a downturn in the industry. I wasn't too surprised about that. The agriculture bit did surprise me a bit, but then again, I've been speaking to people within the agriculture sector. And there's a lot of innovation within the sector at the moment. Obviously, I know the government is pushing this planting for food and jobs, and obviously the vice president is pushing the digital agenda as well. So it seems to me that a lot of these agricultural producers are adopting a lot of technology in their day-to-day activity. So that, for me, I think, in a way, I think it's a good thing, because for me, I think agriculture is the bedrock of our economy, and if we are able to apply technology, in producing our agricultural products, it works best for us. So I wholly embrace it.
I'll come back to you to look at the threats that this poses to some industries and some individuals by extension,
Sure.
and then look at how what all this means for our economy as a whole. Will there be expansion? Will there be contraction? This is Springboard, your virtual university, discussing today the changing world of work. We've been looking at reports by international consortiums bringing perspective on how the world of work has changed across the world. But in today's edition, we are looking at the Ghanaian context. What is happening in Ghana? We found out that sales as a function is in high demand. Customer service is on a dip. We'll find out why as we go along on that one as well. And then we also are finding out that many companies have openly declared that they have made a transition from how they used to do business. And we have companies saying that everything has changed about the way they work. Let's cross over to Chris Diaba to bring us his perspective on what this report means from the perspective of a certified executive coach. Chris.
Well, not too much of surprises. It makes for interesting reading. My first response or first statement has to do with the fact that any piece of work that focuses on measuring and helping us to be able to pinpoint potential areas that are gaps and therefore gives us the opportunity to fill them is great. And that's the first thing. Now, the report gives us an idea of how COVID has had a significant impact on industries, businesses, and jobs. And it's key to point out, if you recall, when we had this conversation on the future of work a year ago, even though COVID was in China at that time, nobody expected that COVID would have such a massive impact on the world. Therefore, the fact of COVID and its happening did not so much become the factor that impacted the future of work. What COVID actually did was it speeded it up in a very massive way. Now, the report looks at an increased focus on digital solutions for businesses. So businesses that otherwise would have not given too much attention to digital or would have taken their time and considered digital as an alternative have now given more impact or influence or focus on digital. So in the Greek sector, for example, that's an area that digital has become increasingly a tool. Now, apart from focusing on digital solution, the report also talks about an increased focus on digital work. And here it talks about or gives the conclusion that work is no longer a place you go, but something you do. And the final interesting thing that stood out for me has to do with the fact that the report offers opportunities and ideas for businesses and the work environment, as well as for individual employees.
Chris, there's a record of companies that have made effort to amend their business model. 88% of companies admit that something they do must change to reflect the way they want to work. I mean, the way they work must change to reflect the changing times. What would you say to that?
Absolutely. The conversation as it was when we had this discussion last year was the fact that a lot of these companies knew that they needed to change how they work. It was more around particularly what do we need to change and what are the areas of focus and areas of emphasis. And so this becomes something that brings the reality very forcefully to us. Now, apart from that, you would notice that there are some areas that you would have in the past considered that, well, these are almost areas that you take for granted. For example, I looked at the reports in terms of top job functions in demand or declining, and they looked at a comparison between January and August 2019 and the same period in 2020. And I was surprised to see that there was some decline in terms of job functions in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. And that's something that struck me. And it struck me because you'd almost assume that if you had a job in this area, then you are safe. But that's not what the reality is showing. And that's something worth exploring. There are a few more things around that. If you see that one obvious bit had to do with the massive decline in job functions in the area of office and admin management. That has been something that in 2019 was around 9.74%, but has massively declined in 2020 to as low as 2.3.5.
And you see also a similar decline in customer service and support.
Yes, customer service support, really, you'd have to admit we saw it coming, didn't we? Because it was no longer a situation where customer service becomes an office or a separate function, but it's now more ingrained in everybody's function. And there's an interesting attention we need to give the question of sales. I have heard somebody who has been a great coach to me say to me that, listen, everybody must aim at training to become a salesperson, because almost everything you do, whether you're speaking, whether you're engaging people, whether you're dealing in goods and services, the skill of selling is a very significant one. And in these times when it's becoming increasingly significant that in addition to all the technological challenges that we're going through, customers are becoming more savvy. You can't just tell them about the characteristics of your product or service and then expect them to pick it. You must be able to convince them, persuade them in very real terms. And that's the power of sales. At the same time, let's be aware that the old-time sales mindset will not remain. It will have to be in combination with other significant skills that will help you make a meaningful impact as a salesperson.
Chris, the interesting thing, let me quote from Arthur Miller. Professor Hinson used it in our last discussion, so let me quote from Arthur Miller. He says, the only thing you have in the world is what you can sell. And the funny thing is you are a salesman and you didn't even know it. So that just confirms what he said. But, and that's from the book, The Death of a Salesman. Let me go on to the implications of this report for job dynamics. What does it mean for the workplace and what must organizations do going forward? That will be the last intervention from you, Chris. What does it mean for job dynamics and what must organizations do as a result of a report like this?
Great question. First thing is for us to have a look at understanding what work really is. You remember we talked earlier on around the fact that work is no longer a location-based activity. It is now the content of what you do. In other words, work is not a place you go to, but it is something you do. Organizations, therefore, will have to rethink the focus or the extreme emphasis on brick and mortar. The level of investment into brick and mortar that a company would hold as theirs would therefore be something that organizations will need to rethink very strongly. Now, beyond that, organizations will also have to consider a reorganization and realignment of issues of compensation on how it becomes a unique selling point and a pull factor for talent. Even the conversation around talent cannot be the same as what we knew it to be. We are therefore not looking at absolute specialists, but something that has been described as specialized generalists. And so organizations would have to now reassess, how are we considering talent? Who are we considering as talent? Because that would then influence the component of performance management. Now, performance management itself becomes another interesting scenario because you know that in the past we have had situations where people are working with their team leaders and working with their team managers, and therefore team managers can see them and can observe what they do. Now, team managers, line managers, people leaders, whatever you call them, are now having to focus on remote working or remote management or virtual leadership. Right. And that becomes very massive in how organizations work towards becoming relevant in the future. The other leg has to do with individual employees. What got you here, and that's almost cliche, will not get you there. How you got to this place, the knowledge you have today is not going to be what would support you for the future. So how do you position yourself? The focus, for example, is on what are those key skills that I must hold on to that would make me relevant for the future. And so those are some of the things that we should look at. Chris, key skills combining what you would refer to as hard skills and soft skills. And in terms of soft skills,
Chris, let me take it on from here and assure you that next week we will do a full-blown discussion about soft skills, and you just hit the nail right on the head. You've talked about the fact that brick and mortar should no longer be the focus in terms of what organizations should do in terms of their setup. You've mentioned specialized generalists, something that Vikram Masharamani spoke about when he came to the Festival of Ideas probably about a decade ago. And then you've talked about performance management, taking on a new shape, form, and style. And then finally, you've also mentioned that what got you here cannot get you there, and therefore there will be a need for skills enhancement. Chris Diaba, a big thank you to you for joining us on your virtual university and for the thoughts that you've shared. This is Springboard, a virtual university. Those are the thoughts of Chris Diaba, an executive coach, bringing us perspective on the Joberman Ghana COVID-19 work report. Kwaku, yes. You heard the thoughts of Chris, very clearly articulated. And let me just sum up his key thoughts. Don't focus on brick and mortar. Reorganize the compensation. Change your perspective about what talent is. And then change your performance management matrices. And then finally, what got you here can't get you there. In terms of the individual, get some new skills to help you go forward. Which of the points catches your attention the most?
I think for me, the one which caught my attention was the bit about what he said, the specialized generalist and not specialist anymore. And which I totally agree with, because I think what Chris is alluding to is that, look, you cannot just go into a job with a particular skill set and still think that you're going to be relevant in another 5 or 10 years. You need to gain other skill sets. So you have to gain other knowledge in other, skill sets, or, to be able to be relevant, 5 or 10 years from now. And that can only be done through what we call the continuous development. So you need to continuously develop your skills. You need to continuously learn new ways of doing things and new skill sets, which will still make you relevant in the industry. So for me, I think that probably is the point that caught my attention. The bit about performance management as well, I think is also very relevant, and that is something that we are actually adopting at, in our organization at Joberman, and we obviously encourage other organizations to also do. So the performance management these days is also, it's gone virtual because I, for example, I'm based here in Ghana, but my boss that I report to is in Nigeria, okay? And yet she's able to manage me on a day-to-day basis. And how do we do that? It's mainly through the 3 mediums. We, first of all, do a lot of Zoom or Hangouts meetings where we talk about, the things I'm working on, and then she provides feedback and gives advice on, how things are needed to be done. We do emails, obviously, which is also another way of communicating. And for me, the third and final one, which a lot of people don't seem to think about these days, is you can have, a lot of these social messaging platforms, but they can also be used for work. Okay, a good example is one we call Slack. Slack is a very good one where you can send instant messages to your colleagues. There's one, there's Hangouts as well. Obviously, there are quite a few of them. Even WhatsApp can be a medium for work. So for me, I think those are the three ways in which people can manage virtually, even if you are not in the same location as your subordinates.
Right. Let's go over to Amos for our Data is King segment. It's imagined that many people, funnily enough, even though they are working from home, which is assumed to be a more relaxed way of working, are suffering from burnout as a result of the increased pressure that comes with working at home. Let's find out what comes out of working at home and the pressures that ensue and the burnout that ensues. Amos, what do you have for us?
The Data is King segment provides credible data for decision-making, analysis, and prediction. Our statistic of the day, it's on remote work burnout. According to a Monster poll, 69% of workers are experiencing burnout symptoms while working from home during COVID-19. However, almost half, that is 42% of workers, do not plan to take time off or vacation time to decompress, which is absolutely critical. According to Guy Winch, a clinical psychologist, doing the following will help you to reduce burnout. Number one, have a time when you switch off work whilst working from home. Number two, create a defined working space in your home and work only from there. Number three, put on work clothes even when working from home and change after work. And number four, turn stressful work-related thoughts into productive and creative thoughts. So our question for you today, what one step will you take from today to rejuvenate for enhanced productivity?
There once was a man who had it all. He had skill, he had charisma. He was loved by all, but above all, he knew the importance of helping others, lifting others up. He knew the importance of giving other people an advantage so that they too would use that advantage to help others. All you need is that advantage that sets you apart from the rest. And when you discover that advantage, life's challenges don't seem so daunting anymore. That's where we come in. Enterprise, your advantage.
Welcome back to Springboard at Virtual University. And before the break, that was Amos with his thoughts about remote work burnout. And I'm sure many of you were fascinated by one of the points or another. My favorite was the fact that you should wear work clothes when you are working. And when you finish, take them off. I love that one. And the point about changing, designating a place where you work is good food for thought for all architects and those building homes to sell, because it obviously means that the demand for studies and home-based working spaces is so big that if you build a house to sell and you don't have a study in it, the demand could fall. That's one free idea you can use in your home designs. Kwaku, what do you think of those data?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. This is the same sort of sentiments that we got when we did the research as well. So for me, I think it's really important that when you're working from home, you have a designated area of work. I like the bit also about the fact that you need to put on some work clothes and take them off, because the danger of not doing that is you might end up doing long hours because you're in your normal clothes and you think you're home, But one thing I've noticed when I was speaking to a lot of my colleagues when we were working from home during the breakdown was a lot of people did longer hours than they normally do if it were home. And that is because they couldn't clearly delineate between when they were working and when they had to spend some time with their family. So the whole idea of taking your clothes off, or putting on work clothes and taking your clothes off, is to clearly distinguish between the fact that, look, I've worked my 8 or 9 hours for the day. Now I'm going to take my clothes off, go back to my normal clothes, and that means it's the end of work, and I'm going to have some time to spend with family. So I think that is really important. The bit about people burning out, I think is a really good point as well, because working from home, sometimes you feel like, okay, I'm home, so there's no need to take some time off, but you're still working, and you're probably even working longer hours than you normally do. So it's good to take some time off work and then just rest, and then recuperate from your exhaustion before you start work again. So all the points that have been made there are perfectly valid.
And the traditional way of measuring work, performance management, is so steeped in presenteeism that the assumption is that if the person is working from home, they are not working or they're not doing much. So how would you even think that the person needs a holiday? So here you are finding out that 1 out of 2 people even think they don't need a holiday because they are already working from home. But that is the kind of conflict that is arising. Let's cross over for wider perspectives to the Western Hemisphere and all the way to Maryland, the USA, and bring on Doris Osae-Addo, one of the international faculty of the virtual university. She will bring us the compliance angle. She's a senior compliance executive. She'll help us understand the compliance angle to this whole idea of working from remote working and all the issues that arise. Doris, thanks for joining us on your virtual university.
Thank you for having me on this very prestigious platform.
Doris, the last time you were here and we spoke about compliance, for many people it was a very new phenomenon. They were not aware of the dynamics of compliance. But here we are in a situation where probably it's even more critical than before. What would you say?
Well, yes, compliance is more critical, but just like in all the other areas, everyone has had to adapt, in terms of what is necessary, what compliance means for organizations, what they would have to do in terms of keeping best business practices, keeping employees engaged. And so just as the other speakers have said, businesses and even in the compliance area have had to be agile. They've had to rethink areas that are more focal, such as looking at internet security, getting employees engaged, getting them involved, getting them charged time correctly, looking at other areas such as sexual harassment, looking at compliance issues such as privacy, intellectual property, and making sure, first of all, from the business, and when I say business, it will also depend on the type of industry you're working in, but looking at making sure that you are keeping all of these in check, and at the same time, helping employees understand that it is still very important, regardless of the fact that they may be working remotely.
Yeah. Doris, help us to understand how different or how similar the Ghanaian situation is to that in the US. Let's start from, for instance, the sheer percentage of organizations, churches, businesses, not-for-profits, governmental organizations that are admitting that they've had to make a radical shift to how they work to be able to cope with the COVID and related restrictions and changes. Is it the same case in the US as well?
Well, again, it will depend on the industry. Lots of businesses have had to close down. Several businesses have had to shut down, especially because in the US, we've been heavily impacted by the COVID situation. You already know, we're talking about over 500 people dying.
500,000.
500,000 people dying. Thank you. In fact, it's actually 514,000. And so it's had a dramatic shift on on the psyche of businesses. And you also saw last year we had the protests on the Black Lives Matter. And so issues such as diversity have come to surface. And so, yes, there are certain things that are the same, where, again, I mentioned initially that businesses have to be agile, they have to adapt. But again, it depends on the situation. Now, if you are seeing several businesses closing, you see unemployment on the rise. If your business is thriving, and certain business areas are thriving. I looked at the reports, and for us, in the areas of healthcare, they're rising, logistics is rising, if your area, the area that you're working in is on the rise, what you want to make sure is that you are keeping your customer base. You're also bringing in more business for the company. And from the compliance perspective, you want to make sure as well that your employees understand what it means to keep compliance issues to the fore. And when I say compliance issues, whatever you were doing before, you are looking at it and making sure that you are even doing better in terms of making sure that if your employees are working from home, they are working remotely, they are actually working. They are charging time correctly. If you are at home again, you're making sure that the internet security that the employees have is on par with what you need, depending on what your security regulations are. So therefore, with your security department, those who handle your IT, they're making sure that they have like VPNs. They're making sure that your intellectual property is secure. Basic things. You don't have employees printing stuff at home. You're making sure as well that confidential information is kept as it is confidential. You're making sure the platforms you're using for your conferences, your meetings, all of that is secure.
Doris,
now, one other area I would add, Albert, go ahead.
I have a big question for you. The point you raised, the last point you raised is the biggest point you've raised so far. How do you maintain confidentiality for board meetings when the person is having a Zoom and you don't know whether next to the person in the Zoom meeting is a friend or a loved one listening into that very sensitive conversation? It can be quite scary. What do you think of some of these new challenges that were not anticipated before remote working became so prominent?
Okay, well, one of the things is, of course, it can never be 100%, right? But what you would want to do is educate your employees and also have them engaged. There was a segment where they talked about burnout and all of that. If you are able to constantly engage your employees, have them understand about these data privacy issues. And data privacy is also a really big thing right now as well. You want to make sure that they understand. You keep the training, you keep the engagement with your employees. Once you get them their buy-in, they are also able to adhere to these best business practices. And as you just mentioned, intellectual property and all of that, you have a set of rules, regulations, and you're constantly engaging with your employees, making sure that they are taking all these precautions, all these necessary steps to make sure that they have kept a secluded area to have their workspace. They are not in the middle of their kitchens or their hall with people walking around and all of that. They do understand. And then again, you need also to watch the types of platforms you're using. I don't know if you saw this in the UK where they had Zoom meetings and people Zoom bombed, those meetings. And this is even at the government level, So companies have moved from certain platforms to other more secure platforms where they can keep their information secure. I would add that I remember last year there were several healthcare industries that were hacked. If you have people hacking, stealing information, it's even more on the rise. So it is the responsibility of the organization to make sure that they invest.
Would you say that these compliance issues raise red flags that companies must take on board when they are redesigning their workplaces as we speak?
Right now, business is not going to be like it was before anymore. Businesses need to understand that compliance issues are very important. Initially, you had a compliance professional who was probably the admin, the HR, the accountant. You can't do that anymore. You must have a dedicated person who would be the kind of watchdog in terms of compliance issues in the company, making sure that they can partner with the different functions of the company. You need to make sure that that compliance person has a seat at the table when important decisions are being made, even at the top. You want to make sure that compliance person has direct channel to the CEO or to the board and is independent. So again, business cannot be done as before if you want to make sure that you are being competitive. You want to make sure that you are, once all of this is gone, after the COVID situation, you are still at a competitive edge. Then you want to make sure that a compliance person is, you are putting focus on having a compliance person at the table, watching over the different components of the company, making sure that all of these compliance issues are being taken care of.
Doris Osae-Addo, thank you very much for joining us all the way from the US with your perspectives on the compliance angles to the changing world of work. And it is clear, Kwaku, that the world can never be the same again. And organizations redesigning their workplaces must take on board some of the things that Doris is saying. She's saying, for instance, there must be somebody at the very top level who is dedicated to compliance, ensuring that the boxes are being ticked in terms of the security of the firm, the security of information, and so on. What do you think of that?
I totally agree 100% with what Doris said, because obviously, with people working at home, there's going to be all these lapses in security. So to the point that she made that, look, compliance issues should be a priority for companies is 100% correct. It's something that companies should take very importantly when dealing with, working from home and obviously the security issues that come with it.
It sounds a bit scary, doesn't it?
It is scary. It is very scary. I mean, I remember I saw this video as well when I think it was a UK MP. I can't remember what it was. He was in a Zoom meeting, and then all of a sudden, one of his children just ran into the room, and his wife came in and had to scuttle the child away, and he has to apologize. And it was a live BBC interview, So those are some of the issues that you have to deal with when working from home. And to the point that you made earlier, as much as possible, you have to create a space where it's secluded so that you can focus on work, and then there will be too many distractions from either family or friends or whoever wants to come
when
in.
the staff is even in a compound house, you can't talk about everybody going to go and inspect where they live. These are realities that we didn't factor in. And I'm sure that nobody's gone to court over any issue. It's not become a big issue, but let's face it. If the person is having a Zoom meeting or a board meeting from a location that is not secure, and out of that, information leaks that should not leak, you will naturally want to hold the person accountable for not protecting the information. But if where they live is such that they can't go anywhere, can you really blame them? We probably need to bring some legal people on to find out where the liability lines fall in all this matter. But let's bring this discussion.
Yes.
So in trying to look at the future of work, we've looked at the Ghanaian situation and the report that makes it clear that while there is a general effort by companies to migrate to a new way of working, you are noticing some functions do well and other functions, the demand not just being there. Chris has explained why he thinks it's not surprising that some of those areas are shrinking, and then the areas that are growing, like sales,
Yes.
he's giving his perspectives on it. What will be, for you, the big implication of this report for instance, economic growth? Will our economy grow, or do you think it will shrink from what you see?
Okay, good. I mean, for me, I think there's hope for the future when it comes to our economy. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know our vice president has already been pushing the digitalization agenda, which for me it's a good thing. He's made quite a few changes at the ports. I like the whole idea of mobile money interoperability as well, because that makes it easy to move money from one platform to another. So for me, I think there is definitely hope for the future. Companies definitely need to start thinking outside the box and not do what they normally do. There has to be a way of working such that they can still thrive even during this difficult situation that we are faced with. One of the quotes that I read actually just before I came in is what change is constant. There are always going to be these challenges. It could be, you're talking about COVID today, it could be something else, in the next couple of years. So for me, I think adaptability and also innovation is key when it comes to being relevant in today's markets.
What will be your closing thoughts for our viewers and listeners out there?
Yeah. So my closing thoughts really is, and I'm going to talk to both employers and job seekers. So with job seekers as well, I'll say to them that, look, despite this challenging situation we face with, there are still really good jobs out there. Okay. The most important thing is you have to be agile. Your attitude has to be right, and you have to always be thinking about, being relevant in today's market by gaining new skills. With employers, I'm going to say that, look, you can't continue doing things the way you used to do them. You have to embrace the digital agenda and also make sure that as much as possible you reduce your reliance on brick and mortar and go more digital. The Bank of Ireland is actually closing 103 branches, and that is because they have embraced the digital agenda and realized that they don't need all these brick and mortar buildings. So they're cutting down on costs, and obviously it's going to help with their profitability. So that's something that we have to think about in Ghana as well.
Springboard, your virtual university, today discussing the changing world of work within the Ghanaian context, the third in our series of conversations on that subject. The good news is that next week we'll bring you part 4, the big one on soft skills. That subject that will simply not go away. I've always said that my favorite soft skill is cognitive flexibility. Next week, I'll bring you 2 wonderful friends of mine, women that I see as big role models in soft skills and particularly in cognitive flexibility. One of them climbed Mountain Afajatu and climbed Mountain Kilimanjaro to raise funds for the elderly. And the second one left a boardroom meeting and jumped on a motorbike to make it for a radio interview and sat on the motorbike back to the boardroom. That is flexibility at the highest level. I'm going to bring 2 of them into the studio next week for a big discussion on soft skills and how they can help you rise to the very top of your field. So then, my name is Albert Ocran, saying a big thank you to Kwaku Agbesi for joining us in this conversation, CEO of Jobberman, and Chris Diaba, the executive coach who joined us along the line, and our friend from the USA, Doris Osae-Addo, who brought us some interesting compliance perspectives, sometimes a bit scary, but very helpful in this conversation. On behalf of Comfort and the entire crew, we want to say God bless you, and God bless you.